is we are creating this library for my clients. So they all have access to a library of resources, and this is part of that. And there will be a question and answer session at the end of the teaching part of the webinar. So if you have really complex issues, what I really recommend is using the 15-minute discovery call where we can really break it down together. And that call is a gift. I really take it as, I don't care if you are not in this place that you can pay me for functional medicine. I will help find the resources to help you get better with the resources that you have. So don't hesitate to access that. And also know that these webinars are a fountain of knowledge. I present a lot of research. You're going to see research studies at the end of the presentation and wellness strategies, but they're really designed for informational purposes and seen as a complementary resource rather than a substitute for personalized care of a medical professional. And this webinar does not establish like a medical provider relationship. And also understand that every individual's path is unique, and we celebrate diversity and encourage you to consult with somebody who understands you and can offer you tailored medical advice. These sessions are meant to inspire and inform and add value to what you're already doing to take care of yourself and spark conversations with your healthcare provider. So given that, I want to welcome you and understand that the objective of this webinar is absolutely to help you understand the impact of gut health and help you empower you to take actionable steps. So hopefully this will be one of those things that you'll feel inspired and ready to hit the ground running when we move forward. So I am curious, you can raise your hand in the chat or just give us a thumbs up. How many of you have experienced digestive issues like bloating or reflux or irregular bowel movements? How many of you have struggled for a little while and maybe haven't found a solution? I hear this story all of the time. In fact, I just did a discovery call with a gentleman today. He had been to like 2 different GI docs and still lots and lots of testing and still didn't have solutions. And we often found that when I was working in that bigger healthcare system, because we were linked up in with other specialists, GI would refer to us because with these more complex cases, just because we had more tools in our tool belt. And so I'm curious, have you also ever noticed how your mood or energy levels change based on what you eat or how your gut is feeling? Yeah, Amanda, you have? That's great. That shows a lot of awareness. Valerie has also noticed that. So, and I'm going to help you guys kind of link how things like skin and mood, energy levels, whether or not you're going to sleep well at night are all tied into your gut. And I'm going to explain the science behind that for you. So let's go on here. So kind of understanding these more complex, more common gut issues. Hang on here. We are 1 people in and doing all the things. Okay, so leaky gut. I want you to understand leaky gut and beyond. And not only does leaky gut, have the symptoms that you would normally think of, like bloating and diarrhea and constipation, but I really want you to understand that there is a huge connection with autoimmunity. And our immune system will often mistake normal tissues for invaders. And that all begins in our gut. And I'm going to explain how that all begins. So this is linked to things like Hashimoto's and rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and even multiple sclerosis. We can also see multiple food sensitivities. So what happens with leaky gut is it allows undigested food proteins to trigger autoimmune reactions, leading to bloating and diarrhea and skin rashes and joint pains. And often this is related to food sensitivities. And we might also see something like poor absorption of these essential minerals and vitamins. And it's not uncommon when we test these nutrient levels like iron and zinc and B12 and magnesium that they're very low. And what this looks like is fatigue and hair loss and muscle weakness and frequent infections. We'll also see inflammation that happens. So when we think of inflammation, that can be chronic pain, mood issues, development even of chronic diseases. Things like cancer are related to chronic inflammation. And persistent low-grade inflammation fuels things like arthritis, cardiovascular disease, that heart disease, and metabolic disorders like diabetes and high cholesterol. So when we see leaky gut, we are really looking at these cells that on here on the left, when we have normal gut tissue, all of those cells really sit really nice and tight up against each other. And then they have these finger-like projections that excretes mucus. And this gut tissue is called GALT, and there is so much that happens with this. But this is really where the inflammation cascade takes place. And this is also where your body decides if something is friend or foe. And what happens with leaky gut is often after like chronic antibiotic use, certain kinds of medication, stress, who has not been feeling the stress lately, that gut tissue can start to break down. So it becomes like a coffee filter that has holes in it, and stuff that we don't want in our bloodstream, literally our shit, starts to link into our bloodstream and cause something called molecular mimicry. And that's where the body becomes confused about whether or not something belongs in the body or it's something that needs to be fought. So when we take a look at this, we can see that this is really global. And when we want to fix pretty much anything in functional medicine, we have to start with the gut in order to make the best progress. Something else that is sometimes surprising to people is that our hormone balance is directly related to our gut health. So there's something called the estrobiome, and this is a collection of gut bacteria that regulates estrogen metabolism. So we can have too much estrogen, and that presents a whole list of problems like weight gain and mood issues, and hair issues, or we can have too little estrogen, and that presents a lot like what it feels like to be in perimenopause or menopause with hot flashing and that sort of thing. So our healthy gut really helps us detoxify and regulate estrogen levels through proper liver and bowel function. And when we have that, what we call dysbiosis, which is imbalanced gut bacteria, that can lead to estrogen dominance, which puts us at risk for PMS, fibroids, endometriosis, and even certain kinds of cancer. And then signs of estrogen gut-related imbalance can be irregular periods, heavy bleeding, bloating, mood swings, and water retention. So this is something that we really have to pay attention to, right? The other thing that happens is thyroid. So big thyroid, Hashimoto's. Most low thyroid is Hashimoto's, and of course that starts in our gut. but also about 20% of our thyroid hormone T4 is converted into the active form in the gut. So if our gut's not working well, we can't convert it into it. It's like moving your thyroid hormone from your savings account to your checking account, and you literally can't pay the bills in your body because 20% is missing. And then things like low stomach acid or certain kinds of infection can impair absorption of certain nutrients that are very important for thyroid, like iodine. And sometimes it's a little tricky to figure out, okay, is this like a gut issue? Is this a thyroid issue? But where they kind of overlap is constipation, bloating, slow metabolism, hair thinning, and brain fog are all important parts of that. Weight management is the gut is definitely a missing part of modern weight management. And so that gut bacteria definitely impacts blood sugar regulation, which can influence whether or not we're packing blood into our cell or blood sugar into our cells, or if we have too much of it kind of floating around our system. It also impairs something called leptin, and that is a hormone that signals fullness. And if we don't have enough leptin, we don't feel full, we feel hungry all of the time, and that can definitely promote weight gain. And so we've found through the research that people with a more diverse gut bacteria tend to have healthier body composition and metabolism. So just to give you guys an idea, when they looked at the diversity of gut bacteria, our ancestors used to have close to 1,600 strains of gut bacteria. And now most of us are urban dwellers, maybe if we're lucky, have 10 or 15 different strains. So when we are looking at this, we're going to talk about probiotics extensively and in their role in healing our gut as we go along. So there's also a huge connection between the gut and mental health. Have you ever felt butterflies in your stomach when you were nervous? Anyone? Yeah, yep. And so that is your gut brain axis in action. What other emotions do you guys notice in your gut, if any?
Nausea.
What was that?
Nausea. That's me, Mitch.
Nausea. Okay. Nausea. All right.
I can't see you. I can't see you, but I'm listening to this whole thing. Okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I can send you this. I can send you the slides, Mitch. Okay. All right.
I'm
So
right on the chart.
okay. All right. Perfect. So, Anna, have you ever noticed that feeling of how you feel eating after processed foods or versus nourishing full foods? And that I'm not talking about just like this like gut or a nausea feeling, but like, have you ever noticed like if you chow down on a lot of sugar, you might feel, if you really pay attention the next day, a little bit more anxious or a little bit more depressed or a little more fatigued. And that is 100% that brain gut connection that happens. So our brain and our gut are directly connected through our vagus nerve. That connection from our brain to our gut is a little faster than on the way up, but it's a constant two-way connection. And it's often referred to our gut as the second brain, and it has its own nervous system, and that regulates digestion and communicates with our central nervous system. And that inflammation in our gut tends to send distress signals to our brain, leading to more symptoms of anxiety and depression. And chronic stress actually can lead to things like that imbalance of gut bacteria, dysbiosis, leaky gut, or worsen gut symptoms like bloating or IBS. So those really savvy GI clinics now employ mental health counselors they embed them in to their practices because they understand that there's such a big connection between irritable bowel syndrome and gut. So we also see a huge amount of neurotransmitter production, particularly serotonin, which is our happy neurotransmitter. That's about 90% of that is made in our gut. And then dopamine is more about motivation and pleasure. That is what actually gets depleted quite a bit by our constant stimulation or scrolling on social media. But it is influenced by our gut bacteria as well. And so that imbalance of gut bacteria can lead to lower neurotransmitter production and all the symptoms that go along with that. So I want to, this little section kind of breaks down what it feels like and the root causes of some different things that happen in our gut. Now, often people feel like the only reason that you would really stop gluten is maybe if you have celiac disease, but there is something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. I would say both of these are a little tricky to test for. One, celiac is an autoimmune condition and is often related to genetics, and non-celiac gluten sensitivity is a lot more common. So both of them are going to look like digestive distress, fatigue, neurological symptoms. You might have skin issues or even joint pain. And both really require being fairly strict about gluten elimination. Now, celiac disease, that's very strict gluten elimination, whereas the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, these people might have a little bit more of a bandwidth for having some gluten, especially if they have something like a digestive enzyme on board. And both with that, we're going to see a damage of the gut lining, particularly when eating gluten. The other thing that is sometimes confusing for people is the difference between irritable bowel syndrome and SIBO. And I would say if you feel confused by this, you're not alone. I actually see a lot of medical providers that don't include this SIBO diagnosis when they're looking at a client. And part of it is that there are these overlapping symptoms. There's like a lot of bloating and gas. There's irregular bowel movements, and it can be on either end of the spectrum. What we want is a nice long snake in the toilet every day. But with people that have IBS or SIBO, they might be in diarrhea mode, or they might be in constipation, or they have a mix of the symptoms. Both of these people are pretty uncomfortable. I would say SIBO is maybe a little more severe, and both of them are going to experience nutrient deficiencies. The thing that is happening is for SIBO, you have an overgrowth of bacteria or fungus in the wrong part of your gut. You actually have it in your small intestine instead of your large intestine. And that is something that is a little harder to treat. The root causes of it can be low stomach acid, or maybe the valves between the different parts of your gut don't shut all the way. It's also really common with people that have been in environments where hygiene maybe it hasn't been stellar, and that could be, I think of vets who have served over in like Afghanistan or other parts of the country or the world where they're maybe not in the cleanest conditions. I also see this a lot with people who have a history of eating disorder. Maybe they have been doing more of a purging type behavior because the bacteria, everything gets mixed up in there. I would say SIBO is often missed. It's not unusual for clients to come to me and they've been going through the system for years without any answers. And here's the key. you should definitely get tested for SIBO if you feel worse when you have probiotics, or you feel worse when you have fiber. And there's certain kinds of fiber that is really sensitive. So things like broccoli and cauliflower are things that are really hard for people that have SIBO. So this can feel super confusing, like, hey, I'm trying to eat healthy and I feel worse. Why? And it's because you have bacteria in the wrong part of your gut and it's overgrown. So one of the factors that contributes to both IBS and SIBO is issues with low stomach acid and enzyme deficiency. And how many of you, have maybe know somebody or are somebody that have taken acid blocking medications like PPIs or antacids long term? Because those can cause more issues, and we'll talk about exactly why. And what if I told you this? This is going to blow your mind, because this is something that conventional medicine and functional medicine do not agree on. What if I told you that acid reflux is caused by too little stomach acid instead of too much? Often what happens with somebody who has reflux, there is definitely an imbalance of bacteria. Usually these people are more yeasty. And then they are getting a surge of acid at the wrong time. So they're not actually they have too little stomach acid in their gut when they're eating their food, and their body has kind of a slow reaction to it, and that's what causes the acid reflux symptoms. So we will often see this with it's like this bacterial and yeast overgrowth goes hand in hand with the acid reflux issues, and people that have bacterial or yeast overgrowth are often, especially yeast overgrowth, they're going to have a hard time eating certain kinds of foods that are yeasty or have a lot of sugar in them. They have more symptoms with that. So key points on this: it is really important to look at digestive enzyme and acid issues if you have problems digesting protein. We need that acid in our stomach because it actually protects against certain pathogens, and it's our first line of defense for having too much bacteria and yeast in our gut, and it naturally declines as we get a little bit older. So, and I think sometimes this is hard to eke out. So this, especially with a chronic cough or a sore throat or a bad taste in the mouth, sometimes that can be caused by allergies. And it would be appropriate to use an acid reducing medication for a short amount of time to determine whether that was allergies or a chronic cough or an acid reflux. If you take the acid reducing medication and the symptoms go away, then it's definitely acid reflux. And then the question is why? And if you have a savvy provider, they're going to be able to help you move through that. So there are definitely some more serious gut conditions that we don't necessarily have time to talk about, but I would say there is a lot of that functional medicine can do for these people. They just need longer time, and they need a more strategic personalization of their plan. But with Crohn's disease, that is an autoimmune condition. There's chronic inflammation. They might have weight loss, and they have really severe pain. These people will often end up in the hospital. Diverticulitis is same. There's more severe pain, but that is usually accompanied with fever. And that's because their gut lining has actually formed these little pockets, and there's food stuck in there, and they get infected. And then colitis is pain and urgent diarrhea, and it's often accompanied with a lot of fatigue, especially if it's been something that they've been working through for a long time, because everything runs right through them. They're not really absorbing the nutrients that they need to do. So any red flags, these are things that you're going to want to call a provider right away for. And that is if you've had a persistent high fever, severe abdominal pain, and I'm talking abdominal pain that wakes you up at night, if you see blood or mucus in your stool, you're vomiting for a long period of time, you're not able to keep anything down, and I would say anything that goes past 24 hours, you're going to want to start worrying about being able to stay hydrated. And if you can't pass a stool, then seek some medical care. So I want to talk about some common pitfalls that I see people coming into my practice with, and help you guys kind of work through these so that you don't fall into these categories, because neither one of these things are super helpful for your healing process. And one is the restrictive diet trap. So one way that people will enter this trap is they will order a food sensitivity test offline, and they will look at it and they will pull everything off that is on that sensitivity test, and that's all they do. And they will stay in that diet plan. Sometimes I've seen people for years, like 5 years, not eat that because they feel like, the way that they've described it to me is like, I'm allergic to this food. And so what I have to explain to them is those food sensitivity tests give you a snapshot of what your body is reacting to right at that moment. And they're usually only good for about 12 to 18 months. And this is really important when we are looking at how to reduce inflammation in your gut so that we can actually heal it. So I will sometimes use these food sensitivity tests with clients that are very resistant to doing an elimination diet, or they just really want to argue about, well, I can keep the sourdough in, right? And it's like, no, actually you are sensitive to gluten, and it's, all the supplements that you're paying for right now to help correct the issues aren't going as far because you continue to eat this thing. So that's one. And then the other restrictive diet that I see is people trying to sort out something like SIBO by themselves, and they notice, after I eat this thing, I feel terrible. So they stop eating that thing, and they don't ever add anything back in, and they don't ever correct the bacterial imbalance that's going in because they don't have the guidance and they don't know how to. And I've literally had people that have walked into my practice that maybe eat 5 foods and have done that for years as well. So when we are using an elimination diet, it's a strategic plan to help you understand how your food is, what foods are you're most sensitive to, and to give your belly a break. And then the goal is always to add foods in back one at a time. Now you might learn, like, my belly really doesn't do well with gluten, and I don't feel like eating it on a real regular basis. And there's nothing wrong with creating that awareness in your life. But if you I'm going to mute this call right here so that we can concentrate. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, that's a really appropriate use of a restrictive diet plan. One thing that I worry about when I see with the restricted diet plans is that as they go along, they're actually reducing their balance of their good and bad bacteria. And we actually need that bacteria. So they end up worsening the problem that is actually causing them to be sensitive to the foods. It is a bacterial imbalance that is causing that sensitivity. They're also failing to really address the root cause, and they start to create nutrient deficiencies. And then there is also this profound psychological stress, which makes them almost afraid of food and contributes to gut dysfunction by increasing the stress hormone cortisol and inflammation. And over time, this can kind of lead to more disordered eating habits and anxiety around food. So I try to get these folks on a plan, and we'll talk about this 5R protocol in just a bit, but I try to get them on a plan that is going to help start tackling that bacterial imbalance. And so when they start to add foods back in, they are finding that they have a lot more bandwidth for that. The other thing that I see that happens for people is they will be put on an acid reducing medication for acid reflux, GERD, or ulcers. And these are really designed to be temporary medications. They're only supposed to be prescribed for 4 to 8 weeks. And they are very helpful when you have a stomach ulcer. It helps that ulcer heal really effectively. But what happens is people will stay on them for years without a healthcare provider reevaluating their needs. And as we talked about before, that stomach acid is really essential for digestion, super important for nutrient absorption, and really important for immune function. So I have a client that has to be on one of these acid reducing medications long term. She has a special case. And what I'm going to do for her is help her, educate her around how she can improve her digestion and make sure that I'm choosing supplements that are going to be the best absorption for her. So what happens with this is a lot of times people will try to stop these medications very abruptly, and the chronic use does lead to dependence. And when they stop them suddenly, it causes acid rebound, and that's super uncomfortable. It's pretty intense. So when you're wanting to get off an acid blocking medication, you need to wean off of it, but also you need to address the issues of bacterial imbalance and poor digestion before for that. So I see your comment there, Erin, that it took you years to get off Prilosec and you're so glad you did. Yes, I'm glad you did too, because that stomach acid is really critical for breaking down and absorbing nutrients, including B12. And if you have low levels of B12, if you have to be on an acid reducing medication, you definitely want to get your B12, magnesium, and calcium, and your iron levels checked. And so, because all of these nutrients need acid for them to be broken down, and B12 is important for fatigue and brain fog and nerves, and magnesium and calcium helps with muscle cramps and heart, keeps your heart beating regularly, and there's a huge osteoporosis risk with these as well. And then iron is something that is, I feel like, completely undiagnosed. If you want an accurate read on your iron, don't get an iron panel, get a ferritin, which is your stored iron. And write this down. You want a ferritin level above 75. So you will, I just saw this today. I had somebody who had a ferritin level of 17, and she had all of these symptoms of brain fog and dizziness, and her hair was thinning, and she was told that lab was normal. And guess what, guys? It's not normal to feel like shit. We don't want to wait until you're dying to do something about it. Yeah, ferritin levels are a great tool and completely covered by insurance. You're also, when we're having the problem with acid stomach or acid reducing medications, we're not breaking down our proteins well, and that can lead to bloating and malabsorption. But guess what? This is a building block for our neurotransmitters, amino acids. And so this can lead to a lot of health issues. So key takeaway, long-term acid suppression is not a good idea for most folks. And if you do need it for some reason, to work with a provider that can help keep you minimize that risk. So the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about was Candida. And I don't necessarily have a slide for that, but it's super common. And we will see this often happen early on in the way of like yeast infections, or sometimes people will have like an itching, or they'll notice like a rash underneath their armpits. Candida is really connected with anxiety. And I've seen this with my clients for years. If I can get their candida levels down, they feel a lot calmer. And then they'll go out and drink a bunch of beer and have some sugar and live it up. And then suddenly they're anxious again and having all these candida symptoms. So that is an important part to look at. And a big risk factor for candida is if you've had long-term antibiotics, or you've had antibiotics frequently. And for me, as a functional medicine provider, if you've had antibiotics more than 5 times, that's frequent. Antibiotics are wonderful, but one of the things that they do is they nuclear bomb all the bacteria in your gut. And you don't necessarily, unless you're, a kimchi eater, or your doctor has told you to take probiotics after taking antibiotics, what you're then creating is the perfect environment for candida to overgrow. So we want to make sure that you guys are definitely taking that. So I am going to actually share with you all this. We're going to move into the portion around this gut health. This is called Welcome to the Healthier Gut Guide. So we're going to skip down here. And a lot of this is stuff that we've just talked about. There's like a better picture of intestinal permeability there for you to kind of help remind you, and then leaky gut affecting the whole body. But this, guys, is where the good stuff is at right here. And this is called the 5R protocol. And this is backed by science. This is what we're taught in functional medicine certification school, how to really help a person work through a gut issue. So the first thing we're going to want to do, and this is key, and here's one of the mistakes that I see people do, is they'll do 1 or 2 of these steps and they'll say, well, it didn't work for me. I did an elimination diet, it didn't work for me. Or I took a probiotic and it didn't work for me. And I would say this is sometimes a little tricky and nuanced, and we're going to want to understand all of your risk factors and personalize this for you. But this is the basic process. So number 1, we're going to want to remove stressors. We're going to want to get rid of things that negatively affect the environment of the GI tract, including allergic or sensitive foods, parasites, and potential problematic yeast or bacteria. And we're going to talk about all of these steps a little bit more in depth. We're going to want to replace those digestive enzymes, and those are taken with the meals. So adding something back that has a digestive enzyme and unless you have an ulcer, hydrochloric acid is wonderful. And bile acids are also wonderful. We're also going to want to re-inoculate, and we're going to do that through fiber and probiotics. And then we're going to want to repair that gut lining as well. And there's lots of options, therapeutic options we have for that. And then this is really important. We need to rebalance. So we need to look at things like sleep and exercise and stress and all of those things that affect your GI tract. So number 1, we want to remove an elimination diet. So this right here is kind of the more strict version of elimination diet. We're taking out things like beef and pork and processed meat, eggs and shellfish, anything soy based. We're going to pull out the less healthy forms of fats and oils. And I would say the exception for butter is ghee. Ghee is still allowed on elimination diet. Peanuts and peanut butter are taken out because a lot of people are sensitive to peanuts and peanut butter. And there's also a high mold count in those things, and that can cause a lot of reactions. Gluten, and if you're not sure what is all gluten, you would want to look at things like wheat, oats. Oats themselves are not don't have gluten in them, but they're run through the same machinery as the wheat is. So you want to get gluten-free oats because of that. Rye is the other thing, and barley all have gluten in them. Milk products, and then this, I actually bend a little bit with my clients. I will still allow like green tea and coffee, but we're going to do it in smaller amounts, and we're not going to do it in the middle of the afternoon, and we're not doing energy drinks because those are not great for you. Alcohol and those sweetened beverages, and then we're going to pull out a lot of these sweeteners. I do have give people some I see your question, so what do we eat then? And that's what I'm going for next. I do give them monk fruit and stevia. So I give all my clients a diet plan that has a shopping list, and it has a recipes, and it has a meal guide. I have embraced AI, and I've actually fed that to an AI assistant, and I can say, hey, this person likes more Mexican flavors, or this person hates peppers, mushrooms, and coconut. Can you create a meal plan for me that will help? They're very busy. They only have like, less than 30 minutes, or they need to use a crock pot or do something like a sheet pan dinner. And it'll actually create a plan for a personalized plan for that client with a shopping list and all the recipes. So what we're going to focus on is whole foods, protein. So we're going to look at like chicken and fish and turkey. And that actually, we want protein and fat to be with every meal, because what happens is when we're used to filling ourselves with processed food, we're going to feel hungry if we don't have the right proportions with things. So we're going to also eat as much fruit and vegetables as we like. All the rest of nuts and seeds are okay. And there are lots of plant-based dairy products like coconut milk and yogurt. And then there's gluten-free grains that we can use as well. It's not as bad as it used to be. There are some lovely gluten-free pastas. Bread, meh, not so much. But this is, we want to do this for 3 or 4 weeks, and then slowly add one thing in it at a time, so that you understand what your relationship is with that. So I've done this myself, where I've gone through elimination diet for 4 weeks. This is the first time I did an elimination diet, and I thought, oh, it just says that the Doughboy's gluten-free bread has been pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out, Jess. Thanks for that tip. I got so excited, and I went and had pizza and a beer, and I was so bloated and miserable, and I had no idea what caused it. Was it the cheese? Was it the alcohol? Was it the sugar? I don't know. So I had to do that all over again. But we're gonna reintroduce, and if you experience any symptoms, if you don't experience the symptoms, go ahead and reintroduce the second food. And I would say this reaction is sometimes slow. And that's what makes it tricky to figure this out, is if you eat this food a couple of days in a row, and sometimes it's like the 3rd or 4th day after eating it that you kind of wake up with a headache, or you feel when you wake up, you're maybe a little anxious. So It's good to keep a diary during this time when you're doing that reintroduction. The other part of remove is we want to move pathogenic bacteria, parasites, and yeast. And this can be done with supplements. And I would say what I've learned about this is to eliminate sugar first, because that is definitely going to prune candida and certain types of bacteria. And then gently start adding whatever product that you like to use to help break down the bacteria and the yeast. If people have really long-standing infections, sometimes they need something called a biofilm disruptor to help break up the blanket that the candida and the bacteria has excreted to protect itself. And this is a process that is very personalized, but this can be, and sometimes this can be uncomfortable if you go too fast and too hard. So using something like a binder and going slow is really important. The next thing in this is to replace, and this is digestive enzymes. And these are taken with meals, and they help us break down foods for absorption. So you guys remember my gal that absolutely had to have the long-term acid reducer. I'm going to have her actually take digestive enzymes when she takes her supplements, because it'll help her break down those supplements a lot quicker and she'll be able to absorb them. And the same for your food. So this can be really helpful. And there's lots of different types of digestive support. So digestive bitters help stimulate that hydrochloric acid and bile production. And that's great for people that are kind of like, they're on the border. Maybe they're starting to get into their 30s or 40s, and their acid and bile production isn't completely shut down. That can help with all those enzymes. Hydrochloric acid is not for those people that have a history of an ulcer, but is super effective. Enzymes can help with starch and proteins and fats. And then we see like plant proteases are really helpful. And those are going to be like, foods that have digestive support in them are things like papaya and pineapple. And so if you're having belly issues, those can be helpful. And biostimulators are the other part of that. We are going to re-inoculate. And I would say this re-inoculation process is very different depending on kind of what your presentation is. I don't re-inoculate my people with SIBO or that bacterial overgrowth until after we've done a complete protocol with them. If people are kind of on the spectrum where we just really want to make sure their digestion is optimized, because we know that we've got some things like detox down the road, I will go ahead and put probiotics on right away for them. So there's so much fascinating research about probiotics, and it can be a very personal recommendation, kind of depending on what else you're presenting as. But good probiotic is going to have Bifidobacter and Lactobacillus usually in it baseline. It's going to be about 20 billion CFUs baseline, and we're going to want to have a couple other strands, probably about 5 or 6 different strands. And there is technology now where you don't necessarily have to have a probiotic that is refrigerated, and a lot of times putting it in the refrigerator, it means that it's going to be forgotten about. So I would rather have a shelf-stable probiotic that is sitting out on the counter and is being taken. Best time to take your probiotic is at night before you go to bed, because that has a chance to really sit in your gut and do its magic. And then there is a whole interesting research about using spore-based probiotics, which is basically probiotics that are taken from dirt, from soil. And so if you're a gardener you're actually getting probiotics. But there are lots of probiotic foods out there. I've got a kombucha SCOBY brewing up some kombucha in my kitchen right now. We eat kimchi in our house. Making your own yogurt is actually easy to do. You're going to take your probiotic cap and bust it open into the milk of your choice and set it next to in a jar next to your oven light overnight. And that's actually a good test of whether or not your probiotics are working. And prebiotics are fiber. So if you're eating a lot of high fiber foods, you don't necessarily need a supplement for that. But for some of us, we just need more fiber than the rest. And then we're going to want to repair that gut. And again, that anti-inflammatory diet is very important, but looking for a supplement that has glutamine and deglycerized licorice, DGL, in it is really helpful. I've actually put in the chat a link that will lead you to my favorite gut health supplements. And you're going to need a Fullscripts, like to sign into Fullscripts to get access to them. But there's a powder substance that I like called GlutatShield that I use here. And then rebalance, making time for relaxation, having a meditation practice, going into yoga, and thinking about mindful eating. And doing like a prep session every week so that you're staying on track with eating can be really important. And there's lots and lots of information here about the rebalance part of your plan. So let me put this back on our slideshow. Here's how you get a hold of me. You can also use that link in the chat. And then here's research. If you're interested, I'd be glad to send you specific studies. And we do have some time for question and answers. So if you're feeling shy, you can put your questions in the chat, or if you're feeling a little more brave, go ahead and unmute yourself.
So I heard one time, I didn't do a lot of research into it, that cabbage can be really good at healing your stomach and gut issues. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I think cabbage could definitely be a part of a plan. I don't think cabbage alone is gonna be part of that. So I think of that 5R protocol kind of like a lasagna, which is a bad analogy because I'm asking you to take gluten and dairy out of your diet, but you can't have a lasagna without all those layers. And that 5R protocol is like that. So you kind of have to stack all of those things. And for some people, that generalized plan has to be tweaked. But I don't see why not. Cabbage is great. Pineapple, papaya is great. Any of those high fiber things like artichokes are great because they have special kinds of fiber in them. Did you, Amanda, hear anything about why they were really saying cabbage was a good option?
It was a few years ago, so I don't really remember.
Okay. That's fine. I can I don't know off the top of my head, and maybe there's like a phytonutrient in cabbage that is helpful. I wouldn't be surprised. Any other questions?
Hey, I had one.
Okay.
You mentioned in the probiotic, the lactobacillus.
Yeah.
Isn't that a milk derivative or not? Because I had problems with dairy and milk, and that's why I never took a probiotic with lactobacillus in it.
Yeah. So if you have like a very strong allergy towards milk, lactobacillus can be a little tough for you. There are some health advantages to lactobacillus and that sort of thing, but you can absolutely find, like, if you just can't tolerate dairy at all, you can find a probiotic that doesn't have any lactobacillus in it.
Okay.
That's a great point. Any other questions?
I have no more.
Okay, I've seen some questions on here. What are the negatives of drinking coffee on an empty stomach? Does it hurt your stomach lining? So I think that there is a certain amount of acid in the stomach. So if you are super sensitive to acid in your stomach lining, it's almost like raw, then the coffee can definitely cause an issue. For most people, having 1 cup of coffee in the morning is not going to do that for them. You can if it is an issue for you and you still want some coffee, then getting a low acid coffee can be very helpful. And then getting something that is organic is also helpful, because there's a decent amount of pesticides in growing coffee. And if you think about it, that bean is soaked in pesticides, and then you're soaking that in water and drinking it. So I would say that's a very personal thing. And if you've had the experience of struggling with that, then we can definitely talk about what those alternatives are. There's one called, it's called Dandy Blend, and you can get it on Amazon, and it's a chicory-based thing. And I will actually, a lot of times, will use this in the summer. It tastes just like coffee, and it dissolves in cold water. And so if I want something that kind of tastes like an iced coffee, but I don't need the caffeine, I can use that. And then Kristen wanted to know, do I have any insight to share on gastroparesis and delayed gastric emptying, and what can help with this? So I first, Kristen, want to know why somebody has that. And there's a lot of reasons why people might have gastroparesis or delayed gastric emptying. And there's a lot of things that you can do about it. So gastroparesis is when you're just not like moving your food through your body. And so what happens is often these people feel full really fast. They're not getting a lot of nutrients in, and then there's an issue with constipation. So one thing that we can do for this is to work on our vagus nerve. So that's that big nerve that starts at the base of our head and goes all the way down our spine. And when we create more vagal tone, we will often have a much better response with the gastroparesis. There are a couple of supplements, like serotonin-based supplements, that help with GI motility. One's called Modal Pro by Pure Encapsulations. That's very helpful. And I've also seen a lot of people benefit from something like low dose naltrexone, which is a whole nother talk in itself, but that is a compounded medication that in higher doses, we used it for overdoses in the hospital system, but at much lower doses, it's great for autoimmune issues and it's great for gut issues. There is also a whole body of research around peptides, and there's different kinds of peptides, and some of them are super specific for gut, and they can be really healing for the gut as well. So I hope that is helpful for you. Sometimes these dietary changes, like making sure that you're for a while doing things like more of a soups and smoothies where things are like really broken down, can be very helpful to just give that gut a rest and help stimulate, give you some time to help stimulate things. So I hope that answered your question. any other things popping up, bubbling up for you guys?
Is there a test for leaky gut?
Repeat your question.
Is there a test for leaky gut?
Okay. Yes. There is a marker called zonulin. It's super expensive to test. I don't often test it. But I will actually look a lot at when people come in, I use a test frequently called NutrEval. And the reason why I love it is it's so many different tests all in one. And it will actually look at serotonin markers. And if I see high serotonin on that test, I know that there's a degree of leaky gut. It also will test for like bacterial fungal markers and look at how well you're absorbing your foods. So that is all kind of plays in. So yeah, there are tests for leaky gut for sure. I think when I'm looking at a client in the eye and we're trying to decide where we're going to go and how we're going to spend their healthcare dollars, rather than using an expensive test for leaky gut, I'm going to more often than not, make that decision with the client to look at their symptoms, go ahead and come up with a diagnosis of leaky gut because it's so common, and use their money to fix the leaky gut to get them feeling better faster. But there are lots of tests out there that kind of confirm that diagnosis if people need really to see it in black and white.
Okay. Interesting.
I don't have a question.
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you for this. It was very, very informative.
Great. I'm glad you got a lot out of it, Amanda. Thank you all so much for showing up. And like I said, the link to get a hold of me is on the very top of that chat. You're always welcome to email me, or we can schedule some time to do a 15-minute phone call to chat about what's going on with you, and I'd be glad to be a resource and help point you in the right direction. So thank you, Kristen and Erin and Valerie, and Amanda and Jess and Mitch. Thank you guys so much for showing up, and thank you for staying. You guys have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.